Well, hi everyone. Let me go to my slides and share my screen. If anyone in the Zoom can't see my screen because of the Wi-Fi speed, I can pause it and I can pause my video and maybe that'll help. Um, yeah. Nope, that's the wrong presentation. All right. Should be good. So welcome everyone. My name is Michael Dimmitt, and I'm here to give a talk on design systems. Okay. What'd you say? I see.
Just turn up the volume. Well, it says not hearing anything. It says turn up volume is what it says.
Oh, because I'm muted. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I have some exciting news. I actually just got back from React Miami, and it was like a 2-day conference. And this is the Node meetup. And Sync is really interesting right now. Sync is these sync engines that allow for you to use IndexedDB in your browser and make requests to the API layer, and then that goes to the database, but it also goes to IndexedDB. And then the database will communicate with the API and it'll reconcile everything locally on your client computer. So that was like really cool about kind of where the web's going. And there are 3 big companies that are really pushing that. And I'm about to talk about design systems, so it's not going to be about React. We typically go to BJ's after this for just hanging out. Whoops. Just hanging out. And you guys are more than welcome to come and chat more about this, about some of these subjects, and about some of the things I saw at React Miami. Also, I know David's always looking for new speakers, so if anyone wants to be here instead of me, if you're tired of me giving the talks, feel free to put your hat in the ring, and we'll be happy to help you in any way. Okay, design systems. From a UI perspective, I'm Michael Dimmitt, and I'm a software developer. Here are all my social links. I'll put the slides in the meetup and the Slack channel, and if you want them in some other way, just let me know, and I'll get that info to you. Okay. Oops. So I've worked in a lot of different environments with designers, sometimes with no designers. Sometimes I've worked with a team of designers, and sometimes there's been a designer that's floating around to different teams. Every time I interact with designers, even when I don't have a designer on the team, there's always a similar solution that I end up doing in the UI side in order to organize things, communicate back, bring benefit back to the design team. It's not so much what can they do for you, it's how can we help the design to be better. I think when I talk to a lot of people, that's the feedback that I get, is that they always want to get other people, get the designers to do whatever they're trying to do, instead of how can I empower them. And like most of the designers are my greatest allies when I work with them. This is the same for QA testing. They usually help me a lot. And so it's not an adversarial relationship. It's more of like a cooperative relationship. And that's part of what this presentation will be focused on. So far, my last talk was a talk called Coding with Confidence. And that talk was all about kind of communicating with everyone and how do we get our code workflow in that mode. And it did bring up using design systems as part of that discussion. This talk will be around design systems and how can we make the design, how can we empower the design, and how can we empower the design team? And then he's not here, I don't think. RJ asked me to do a testing talk. He thought that would be interesting. And so, yeah, I think my next talk, if no one else is presenting next month, will probably be around testing. All of the different ways we test and how to improve different setups that you find yourself in. Okay. All right, so why am I giving the talk? Originally, the talk was just to show a cool thing, to show a working model that we used to complete a challenge and generate a website in 8 hours with a full team and show that we knew what we were doing. And there was a design component to that project, and the designer was put into a rapid prototyping situation that they hadn't been a part of before. So I ended up doing a lot of the rapid prototyping, and I also ended up working with them on that challenge. And I think that's the first thing I'm going to convey in this talk. And then I'm going to give a more higher level of other things we might get. So first, I just want to show you guys some cool thing. So this is the challenge: build something in 8 hours. It should have accessibility, and it should be adhering to some of the government objectives. So the US web design system is like similar to Figma or Tailwinds. It's a fully featured component library, plus it has other elements of concepts on their philosophy. I wrote a write-up of it. Let's see. Right here, which is a GitHub gist of just like how it went, some of the things that we explored. One thing to note is and a lot of people will say this, why would we use something like Material UI? Well, and the big negative there is everyone ends up building the same thing and everything ends up looking the same. Well, there are some situations where you do want to look the same, which is if we look at the philosophy of the web design system, they actually want to have a unified look and feel for all government websites, so that when you're looking at them, you know that you're on a government website. You have the same banner. It conveys trust. So sometimes we do want uniformity, even across the entire organization. And that might be a location where you do use a design system. In this document here, they just convey that the big thing to follow is just the principles, and then to follow other guidance patterns that they have. And if you so choose to start going and implementing it at the code level. I came up with a format where we would just go ahead and jump right into the code level. And that was made possible because, yeah, just go here. This is the components section of the US web design system. This is where they publish all of the elements that you might use. And when you look at the code, this is all HTML and CSS, which is not quite helpful if I'm using a web framework. However, one of the great things about the US web design system is that they have an implementation section where you can search for a framework like React, and then that will take you to a component library written in that language. There's one for Rails. If we click on that right here, there's actually a storybook implementation where you can then go see the code, copy the banner, and paste it into your React application. And this just works. So there is a little bit of setup, getting the TrustWorks, who built that out as a project. They're a consulting company for the government. I'm not affiliated with them, but they did a good job with that storybook. once we did that, we went over to the published, again, this is from TrustWorks, but it's a web design system file. And if you open that up, you see all the fonts, and then you start getting over to alerts and some of the components. So what a login page might look like. This is their template section right here. You start to see all the buttons that they expose, and things like linking, and there's a news section that's quite nice. The other thing you can do is you can just go over here, copy this, come over here, paste it, and now you have like a kind of an example phone, and you can just start deleting things and building things out, and building screens so that you can quickly get the look and feel that you want. At this point, we went and had a designer look through all of these different components and come up with ones that we could use so that we wouldn't have to be making anything custom. Anytime you have to do something custom, that's going to take a lot of time. Also, anytime you have to make a decision on how something should look, that's also going to take a lot of time. So in this way, also with Figma, we're able to add notes and comment on what we think about the design, and everyone can kind of look at it together. So this was a really good workflow that helped us achieve our goal in a competition setting. But it's also quite useful when you're working in your day-to-day, and you don't just have to use the US web design system. In fact, there are a lot of different implementations that we can use that are publicly available. IBM's Carbon system, for example, you can scroll down here and you can open up their Figma kit and external users. There's a link in here that takes you right to a Figma file. Now this one's a little bit different because it doesn't have it all on one page, which makes it a little bit harder to interact with. So the way that this one works is you have to scroll through, you have to find the the item that you're looking for, and then they have a convenient screen section where you might kind of get the column structure that you want, and you would just build your own kind of screen area, and yeah, you would just be bringing stuff in from other spots. So it's a similar pattern. Now you would also want to just go into IBM Carbon and look up their components so that you have a one-to-one match. Kind of the thing to note in terms of speed is when we start deviating from this pattern, that's when you're going to start having some slowdown. So it's just food for thought there. I'm going to get back on topic since I have more to this presentation. But yeah, I would encourage people to just look at some of these design systems and kind of keep an open mind there. You'll notice in the top right corner, I have these themes that are going on throughout the presentation. So if we go back to the outline, this is how to be time efficient. And then we see in the top right corner, how to be time efficient, kind of letting you know where we are, what we're working on. Okay. So now we're going to talk further. We're going to talk about what we're going to learn in the talk. Oh, there's a typo. What designers want, how to build what designers want. So, yeah, we're going to dig in. Part of this outline was formed based off of feedback I got from my last talk, things that people were asking me that I didn't expect, like struggles that they had, such as, why can't we get our offshore developers to build the thing that we need. And there should be some stuff at the end to potentially give solutions on how they might go about designing or building UIs that match the designs. All right, so we like to be time efficient. What are some other ways we can save time? Well, we can capture anytime we make a design decision, and then like that's going to save us the most time. Later, we'll talk about how to make the decisions. That is usually in the realm of the designers, but understanding how they came to those decisions, also having decisions of your own, these are going to be really good for you. So even if you disagree with what someone else believes, you might still implement their solution. And I'll kind of talk about some scenarios where that's happened to me. Okay, so there's a great book called Refactoring UI. And in that book, they mention that every time you make a design decision, you should, in a sense, capture it. You should put it into, you need a way to organize it. And usually we can do that in our, let's say, Figma file or whatever design tool we use. And we can start building and documenting all of our decisions that we've made. Yeah, I'm going to start diving into some of these items. So this will be a journey as we go through, but this is some of the items we're going to cover. So color. Color can be tricky. When there's too many colors, it can be a real nightmare. One thing that I did in a previous application was to add all the colors in a funnel of sorts in a giant JavaScript file. So I would use a find and replace in our application. I would add all the colors there, and then everything would be brought in from that single variable. And then I would have something iterate over and expose all the colors in this way. And I actually made a GitHub repo that people can use to quickly recreate this yourself if you ever need to. And what this was valuable for is that the names of the colors at the time were not standard colors or standard names. They were whatever the designer had come up with or whatever the developer had come up with. And they also did not they also did not put the color names in the Figma file. They just were kind of using a color picker and just finding colors that they enjoyed. Also, there were some dynamic colors or auto-generated colors. So that was there was no understanding of why those colors might exist, and we didn't have contact with this developer. They were across multiple teams, and their time was very valuable. So this was a tool that I was able to consolidate all this info on, have some deep conversations, and then we were eventually able to present this info back to that designer so that they were able to, which they really appreciated, because they were able to look at things like pewter blue and pewter blue 2 and make a decision on should that color be eliminated or should that color remain. It allowed us to shrink down the number of hex color codes we had in the application. So overall, it was quite nice. One thing to note, let's see if I can do it. If you go to the Figma file and you own it, like if you're an editor, you see a different view than if you're a viewer. So that was one of the reasons why a lot of our colors got in trouble. If I'm an editor, I can come in here and I can like look at the bottom and it'll show all the colors and like kind of their names. But as a viewer who doesn't have edit access, you don't have these things. So what you can do is duplicate whatever Figma file that designer might have to be able to access some of these values. That being said, like even here, these are just hex values. Okay.
What do you do with those colors after you get them all lined up?
It just allows you to start making decisions on should these colors still be there? You know, should these colors have names? So what I did is I went to a website called Color Name. I think it's actually at the end of the talk. It might be here. Okay, yeah, it's just this is actually kind of cool too. This is just W3 schools, and you can click to sort the colors by name, or you can click again to sort by hex value, which kind of groups the colors by color grouping because of the way like hex works in terms of like the hex based system. RGB. Okay. All right. Another detail from refactoring UI is the different types of colors you have. And the one that's going to be occurring most in your application is your neutrals. Now, these are the thoughts of the person who wrote that book. And so this is an example of a colored decision of kind of a viewpoint that that person has. You don't have to read all this text, but I found this to be quite helpful. And another way that they presented their colors in this book, there's actually a Figma file where someone, like a hobbyist, kind of put together kind of what was available via the book, where you see this is like an example application that's not at the beginning phases where you would have a very small amount of decisions, but kind of what they would do like by the end of a project. And so you have like your different main colors, and then you have kind of variations of them, different tones of them. And then the way that they present it is with a kind of a page template where they lace in the colors. So this is what the person who wrote the book Refactoring UI does. And this is kind of the guy who wrote Refactoring UI is one of the founders of Tailwinds. So it's a lot of his design decisions that are kind of conveyed in that book. Okay.
So in those frameworks, like in this example, like in palette form, you've got the primary teal, and then it lists several swatches there. Like typically what you'll see, and you can zoom in like down to the details to validate this, but like several of the first numbers will be similar because they're essentially the same hue. And you can, in other situations that I've worked on, what we've done to sort of simplify this and not have tons of stuff in the palette is essentially have, okay, one for the hue, and then sort of another that controls the brightness. So if you want to like make the teal light, you have something with white and an alpha on it, and then you composite those together, or black, for example. And then it's a lot easier then to sort of say, okay, well, we want to use this teal, but we want to use it as a percentage, right? Like, you know, and then you can come up with a range from 0 being white to 100 being black, or there's like a lot of different ways to do it. But reason why I'm saying it is that can be sort of a lot easier human readable and manageable way to sort of derive all the stuff that you typically see in those large palettes with only like, okay, these are brand colors, and then these are essentially contrast dependent variants of that. Like some of it's design choice specific, some of it's accessibility specific, but with a little bit of incremental complexity on the developer side, and just the designer and the developer sort of like working in tandem, I think it can allow you a lot more flexibility. And I think, you know, maybe Node is sort of a bad example, but if you're doing like embedded hardware systems, like where you have, okay, something in a Figma file that you're like rendering on MacBooks or PCs versus something you're running like on a small piece of hardware with a display that's sort of calibrated firmware, you can also like put in adjustments so that, you know, what the designer is seeing and what the developer is developing, they essentially have, you know, something baked into the pipeline so that they're not like constantly tweaking and troubleshooting that happen with that. But there, you know, there's a lot of complexity here, but I think you can sort of lean into a small amount of systems thinking to make it flexible and adaptable for the development team's purpose.
Nice. So we just got some input for the other people on the call around some ways you might tweak the hue, the brightness. Are you a fan of HSL, the hue, saturation, and lightness?
I personally think that that's easier than looking at the hex value, but like in most modern color pickers, one of the things that is nice is you can toggle between the hue, saturation, and brightness, and then just like revert it back to the hex. So it's like, I would never go in there and adjust the brightness value with the hex code. I would go in there, leave sort of like color swatch, whatever I want to pick, then toggle over to the brightness adjustment, and then you know, slide it up or down. But as I was saying, like, I think the most flexible and adaptable way to do that, to ensure that like the hue and the saturation are fixed, is to just like have one thing that changes the value as a separate control.
Okay, yeah. So we were just talking about a color picker to change some of the values, and also having something that can, I guess, control the like some of the values as you tweak it, and kind of a systems approach to changing some of the colors. Okay. Yeah, so, oh, and then I have a formatting issue down here, which is hilarious. But yeah, your neutrals are going to be your largest swaths within your application. And then your primary colors are going to be your splashes that you use to engage people. And supporting is kind of less put in, but it makes things stand out. Okay, so here is another way that I communicated back to designers of these are all the, let's say, composite components in our application, where we would mix text, and we would mix a pill, and we would mix checkboxes all together. And being able to have access to all of them and all the different colors that we used with them was quite valuable. Another thing that you tend to do is find all the places we use secondary colors in our application and communicate that back to the designer. And I tend to do that in the form of screenshots. I'll take a lot of screenshots, send them screenshots of all of the kind of locations in the application, so that they're knowing where we have any variances, where maybe different dialogues have different looking secondary color buttons, and what direction we should go to unify it. Also, you go ahead.
But just to add on to this is, in a typical development environment, one of the things that it depends on how you have it structured and how technically savvy the designer is, but exporting the assets from Figma, like if you're using SVGs or if you're using things, or like if you're doing 9 slicing or like whatever it is, right? Like it can sort of vary from a technical artwork perspective, what you're trying to generate and what the file format is. But I think the biggest key is that the designer and the developer have to be in lockstep about what the naming convention is, so that you don't have like, mail on one side of it and then envelope on the other. Because if the developer is saying, oh, like this envelope looks crappy and it's named mail somewhere else, that like that's gonna cause tons of confusion. So I think that, like, in addition to sort of having a sort of bottom up sort of stack to build out complexity, making sure that sort of the underlying syntax between what you're actually building is harmonized will save tons of troubleshooting and errors and miscommunication and that kind of stuff. And I realize it's more of a, process detail than a design detail, but it will make, it will streamline sort of interaction with common.
Yeah, so what was just mentioned is this concept of having similar variable names or on a theme. So like if I had a physical mail and I called it mail, that's my SVG. And then I had another one called envelope. Like they mean similar things, but now you have two names for things that are similar. And so you have one envelope that looks terrible and you have another one that looks great. And you can't find the one that looks terrible in your code base because they're named semi-differently. So being lockstep on the naming conventions can be really useful. This I'm actually going to add to the show me the colors repo. All of these items were similar. They were in a code funnel where all the SVGs lived in one page. So I could just iterate over them. And this is like auto-generated. And then there would be icons that are light colored and icons that are dark colored. So the light colored icons have that teal background and the dark colored icons have the smoke gray background. Also like all of these expose their variable names. So when you would hover over them, they would give you a tooltip that would let you know the name of the icon itself. So you could go find it in your code base. So this was like a valuable resource to the designer who could then come in and say, I've named it this, but in your application, you've named it that. So go change that icon to whatever. They now are closer to the code base. So they're able to have better communication with developers. So it's all about those wins we can have in communicating with the designers to make their job easier so that they can be more effective. Font. So when you're dealing with font, you might be thinking of things like, also on the last page, with the composite inputs, you might be thinking of how wide should an input be? And like if it has a placeholder text, but it's not auto growing, how wide should I make that input? And there are standard widths, and this is just a personal kind of take on it. But personally, I like to use the W's in fonts to figure out like how wide something should be. I actually am overruled at work where the designer more prefers a columnar structure, which is probably more common. And so like we also have something about our inputs that are intentional, which is that we make everything 100% and fit it inside of a div. So everything grows to 100%, which is actually quite nice if you're going with a column approach, because then you just wrap everything around columns and call it a day. Whereas if you went with what I was just conveying, where you would do, let's say this has 20 characters, so it would be, 40 pixels wide because of you're looking at the W's of text for a certain font. Now you've got a situation where you're trying to fit that column, but maybe you do need it to grow. So our stuff is already kind of set up for that. And so it's good to have takes and opinions on how you might think, something should be, but then also be flexible and allow other people to have takes and opinions and try to implement those to their fullest and help them to succeed. And just that little thing about all of our inputs growing to 100%, most other code bases don't do that by default. So we've like intentionally broken, it's like you've kind of broken an arm in order to fix it. And just knowing that that decision has taken place makes it so much more efficient to work within that code base. Like imagine if you joined and no one told you about that, it would be very frustrating. Yes, what do you have?
So with a lot of the customizations and the design for the user interface, is it typical, I guess, for a company, like maybe for a new project, that they're trying to decide some of the different types of setups for, these different features? Or is it something that would typically happen for any type of application they're developing? So I guess what I'm trying to figure is, is it normal that this is just like something that's done at like, okay, we're gonna start an app, and then if we make another app, we're just gonna just take what we've already have and just incorporate that into that new app? Or is this like a new process in there?
Are you talking about the overall the process or like
Yes.
specifically the fonts?
The overall.
Okay,
process.
yeah. So I did some consulting, and when I did consulting, I was always coming into new code bases. And every time you come into new code bases, there are decisions that have already been made. So you are coming up to speed. And it's the degree to which you can come up to speed, like how fast, that is quite valuable. Because you're just able to understand what directions they were going and program within those directions. So there's a great book. I'm going to list it at the end. I was actually told about it by one of the attendees here, but it's called How to Design Cool Stuff. And that book was fascinating. It talked about using images to kind of drive your message and also using themes to drive your message. So sometimes your theme might make the core image that's on the page like a tree, and that might inform the design of that page and then the overall system. So in their example, they had like a tree, and then the shape of the tree was how they decided how they would do the font. So to answer your question, you can be custom to achieve certain objectives. I think for the most part, people use like the standard fonts that they like. There's like, it's not just fonts, but typically you try to stay with whatever kind of existing published design system exists. You try to limit your choices, not make too many of them. I'll talk about that in a second. And then as your application grows, you might add some nuance, or you might be strategic at the start and you might figure a lot of that stuff out. It just depends on like the goals that you're trying to achieve. And I think I might have mentioned it earlier. There's something, it was in I have two books here, but it was in a book called The Design of Everyday Things. They say like there's a research article called like Different, where if you're constantly copying your competitors, everything kind of looks the same. So you might choose to do something to stand out. So it's not out of the ordinary to be interacting in different ways with the code base. That being said, this was a unique situation where we actually had 4 fonts in our application. And so sometimes those fonts would collide. That's why I put like the pass and the fail scenario in the slide. And also, there are some interesting properties. Like if you look at Roboto, I think that's called monochromatic. Like all the numbers are exactly even. So they have like the exact same width. Whereas the other ones, you would look at the zeros for the widest and the ones for the thinnest if you were trying to get the widths right.
Yeah, the I versus W thing's really interesting, like how much that's different, you know?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Okay. Also font weight, some fonts do not have all of the font weights, so that can come into play. And so you might find ways to, I think I was conveying here, like maybe have all the font weights displayed so you could do similar tests with some of the items to figure out, like when it's bolded, do I want to treat this input a little bit differently? Okay, so we've just learned how to kind of capture some design decisions, some of the tricks that I've made to communicate back to designers. Also like how to use maybe design tools that are you know, like design systems that exist that are kind of published, that are people's opinions of things, like the US web design system, that we might riff off of and add to, but that can form a base for us. And so now I think I'll talk about how to make some decisions, whether you're with designers or without designers. So I intentionally wrote lines over here so you guys wouldn't read all the text. The key concepts here are to limit your choices when you're starting out. If you notice like the buttons down here, they have a lot of different hex values that you can't see, but the color looks pretty much the same. So how do you know which one to choose? How do you know how many pixels something should be? One strategy proposed in refactoring UI is to make these jumps of like small, medium, big. So if I'm trying to decide something between 12 pixels, 16 pixels, and 24 pixels, I just make like a drastic jump. And in doing that, I can kind of see what I like. This doesn't look good. This does look good. On top of that, I wanted to have some slides on tachyons and tailwinds, because tachyons has a great section where it says like good design is based off of math. And then refactoring UI and tailwinds says like that's a good starting point, but it's like kind of primitive. Like and he kind of advocates to be a little bit more flexible and not necessarily like purely mathematical. Though I think it would be really nice if design systems use the Fibonacci sequence, but they tend to use a base 2 system because it's just easier to divide things up. As we see here as well, they kind of keep the color choices at a minimum, which allows them to not have like analysis paralysis with having too many colors. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so how to make decisions? Well, part of making decisions is being able to convey and get other people to buy into your decisions. If I have a strong opinion, but I can never get it across the finish line, then that's no good. Also, so ego is one of the reasons why I'm giving this presentation. Ego is that thing that makes you feel good. It's the ambition inside of you that makes you want to get up in the morning. Ego is the thing that is going to think you have a good idea. It can also be biased, but it can also be intuition. Intuition is how we sometimes come up with some of our best ideas. So you don't want to be paralyzed and think you can't make decisions, but you just want to realize that you might be coming from a very one-sided perspective. On top of that, you have a boss, right? And one of the things that was impactful in a previous role is that I was not able to make any design decisions and we didn't have a designer. And then they hired someone as a designer. And because they hired them for that position, they were more willing to listen to those opinions. So sometimes just having a boss that's palatable to those ideas makes you a great messenger. So I leverage that to be able to just help them to forward great ideas and just help the designer succeed, because they were the messenger. And so the more success that the messenger has, the more like we'll be able to improve the product. All right, so moving on from that, you have white papers, market research, competitors. Now, why is that listed as the next tiered and not the final tier? Well, that is information that's going to be really helpful. That's where a lot of the content I'm giving you today came from books that I've read. However, that doesn't necessarily give info on your particular customer. So what we tend to have to do when we're working in UI is we need to get our boss to buy into something. Our boss might have a quirk. When we go to deliver something, they might always want to request a single change, or they might want, you have to be careful not to make them feel like they're wrong and you're right. You have to suggest like a way that they could increase profits and then have it be their idea and have like a success enchilada and let them enjoy the success enchilada. And so like, this is how you get things done, people. And so, oh, I'm going to read a quote from a book. But also they think like their intuition is great, and justifiably so. And what we usually have to do is move them to a point where we can start getting some metrics and numbers, but we have to get them to buy into that. And so I've been in different situations where we've started to get numbers, where we've used things like Adobe Target to do A/B testing where we test out a new feature and we prove that it's actually having an uptick in our scenario. So this is a white paper example from the book, The Design of Everyday Things, that I was kind of talking about with differentiation. And it says, in her book, Different, Harvard professor Young Mi Moon argues that it is this attempt to match competition that causes all products to be the same. When companies try to increase sales by matching every feature of their competitors, they end up hurting themselves. After all, when products from two companies match feature by feature, there's no longer any reason for a customer to prefer one over the other. This is competition-driven design, unfortunately. In here they convey to find out like who are you serving and how can you make a kind of a delightful product for them, and also how can you make a product that will make money. Yeah. So then on top of that, you want to do qualitative research and quantitative research. An example of the quantitative research is the A/B testing that I was doing in a previous company. On top of that, where I worked, we would do user interviews. And a good book on that as well is The Design of Everyday, or Don't Make Me Think, which is another book that I'll be showing. So you want to know like your current horizon, like what's going on, how are we currently doing in the market, and you want to know like where are we going and like how do we get there, and like what will we have to be designing for the future. So both are important, and yeah, this is kind of like my experience on UI is just you always have to play this game. Like every single place you go to, you always play this game. And the first one with your ego is there because sometimes you don't have a boss. Sometimes you're just figuring everything out yourself. So how do you know what's good? Then you have to have that conversation with yourself and figure out how to move forward. Okay, so now the outline's getting a little bit cleaner because like I had forgotten to copy and paste them to the slides previous. So we learned like how to make good design, or how to be time efficient, how to capture design decisions to be efficient, and how do we make those decisions. But now, like, how do we build what the designers want? Because that's another frustration I hear from people, is that like these designers are like pie in the sky guys, and like I can't get them to like just be reasonable. So all right, so here's the first thing. I used to blame fonts, and it turns out that there's a nice little property in Flexbox. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's a line items baseline. A line items baseline is a godsend. It aligns the fonts to like the base, but it's, there are ascenders and descenders like a Y, which will go below that baseline. But that's what's going to give you that clean feel. So we were, having multiple fonts next to each other or different font sizes, and it just looked nasty. It looked like a line item center. And we would do this. Ooh, it was the worst hack ever. You would do like a padding bottom, 0.25 REM. And like, it was just riddled in our code base. And all we had to do was a line items baseline. This was like a moment where I was like, dope, but it was great. And then turns out, if you wanted to do another challenge, like put really big text next to some like super wordy text, you can use a line items last baseline, which I figured out. And I have like an example of it here. But this was like a big challenge on Stack Overflow where they're like, what do I do? And turns out there's a solution for that. It's called a line items last baseline. And what this means is that when that text wraps, you see in the first picture at the top that the first line of the wrap text is the thing that's showing on its baseline. And then you see after last baseline that it's still it's still going off of the baseline, but it's going off the baseline of the last line, which is so valuable if you had a weird problem like this. You don't need it until you need it. And then you get a code review where someone's like, dude, why do you have padding bottom 7 REM? or like it's a calculated value. I don't get it. Well, it's probably because they didn't expect something like that. So designers, it might not be that you're being too difficult. It might just be that we don't know about a line item's last baseline. What do you got?
So I guess the question would be, when after doing, several types of, user interfaces, does anything appear to jump out, like as far as conventions, for example? Have you noticed that when you use a specific font, that it's best to use a particular color or a particular component or things of that nature? So
Okay.
that in the design of your future products, you begin to kind of see, oh, so it's not like you're really starting from scratch.
Yeah, okay, so
Clear?
the question is, are there patterns that emerge of when I'm building something out? I have a toolbox, let's say, of what I commonly do together. I would say a lot of designers have their own toolbox. I would also say that yes, there are actually correct ways to solve this problem. The book How to Design Cool Things actually talks about how you might choose a font. There are like font types, and then like I think like there are also little tricks like this. Like this is definitely something in my toolbox that every single time I go on a project now, I'm going to be considering this when I run into this issue. Like I'm just kind of going over like frequently encountered events. It's not FAQ, it's FEQ or FEE. Yeah. So we could talk more about that. There's like multiple books that all have different takes on it, but also those are opinions, right? You've got to have your own take, and you'll develop that over time for sure. Okay, this was probably the most helpful thing in my career. Let me move this. So I was struggling. This is my first JavaScript job. There was someone from a Hack Reactor boot camp in San Francisco, and he was on my team. And I was just overwhelmed by the amount of complexity I had to do with some nursing alert system that would just present all this information in a grid. And he's like, dude, the web is just all rectangles. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah. He's like, let me show you. And he just started drawing rectangles, and he drew the outer rectangle and then the inner rectangle and then the vertical rectangle. And he just took out a napkin and he just started drawing with a marker. And that's actually another thing from a book called Shape Up, which says like at 37 Signals, which is a Ruby consultancy, they plan all their stuff out by just getting a very thick Sharpie, because it is a constraint that keeps them from overthinking things. And so it allows them to quickly build layouts. So actually the one on the right, there was a guy I was teaching who comes to the meetups. He comes to the Code and Coffee meetups. And he said, I just took a UI interview test and I failed. I couldn't build the design that they wanted for like some Spotify clone. And I'm like, well, let's look at it. And we just took out a napkin at Starbucks and we just started drawing all the boxes out. And then like, oh, this is a fun one. Oh yeah, it's here. Teaching Flexbox on a napkin at Starbucks. So if you look at the code, I'll just go to the code pen. Yeah, so here, but if you look at the code, what I did is just, I just put like background. Let me see. So like, just all, no rhyme or reason for what colors I chose, except for whatever the HTML defaults were. And then like, we just started using like a tachyon syntax where you're just tacking these utility classes on to do like the background color. And then you'd have like special kind of logic in here for anything needed. And I think it was just like columns and rows all the way down. But since we had the napkin to work from, like, there you go. Like that was what we needed. And I think there were some things that needed to have like a height, and there were some things that needed to grow. And yeah, we did it in like 30 minutes. And he was like, Oh, wow. And he felt really happy about that. So his joy brought me joy. Okay. This is like more info. I think we're close to the end of the talk. And like here, color name was like the website I used to quickly look up you would just say like hashtag 12345 6 and then search. And then it just pops up Space Cadet, right? So these names are not actually silly names. There's a standards board that they come up with all the color names. And these designers, they don't use the official color names. Like, come on, guys, like get with it. Okay. We don't need like an on-brand, little nickname. We need like the official, standards board stuff. So just send this URL to your neighborhood designer and like call it a day. If you wanted to learn a little bit more about typography, this article is amazing where it's just got this screenshot alone just shows you a lot about the ascenders, the descenders, the baseline. And then you start to get into serif and sans serif, and that can be dangerous waters. X height. Yeah, so here they talk about serif. So if you wanted to be fancy as you're drinking your coffee, start talking about serif and Comic Sans. All right. What's this one? Type X. It's just a tool. More. All right, so here are some of the books that I've found like super helpful over the years, and I have heard about this atomic design, but I need to look into it more. And then right next to it, I wrote a little snippet of like what you're going to get out of it. Now, don't make me think you're going to get so much more out of it, but like it'll tell you how to do a qualitative research interview where you follow a script and you get them to interact with your website without trying to influence them too much. I read a quote from the book of Design of Everyday Things in our discussion. Refactoring UI is kind of an expensive book, but it's like HTML plus CSS plus design tools kind of put together. And it could be read in like 2 days. A lot of these books can be read quickly, except for the Design of Everyday Things. That one's a little bit beefier. And then the how to design cool stuff, that's what it is, designing around an image or a theme. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah. So from the preface of Don't Make Me Think is a really cool breakdown of how to evaluate a user interface. We're kind of off of the map where I was kind of putting what you're going to learn, but this is how I evaluate UIs. I actually have a book here where whenever I have like a UI that I like, I kind of draw it out and I kind of put in like, is this memorable? Why is this memorable? Am I like learning it from scratch every time? That's fine if it's easy to learn. And then it puts at the bottom, is it delightful? And that's because like in that book, they say like being able to do something like the intended result is more important than it being delightful. Like being delightful doesn't necessarily make you money. It's being able to like service a customer's needs that makes you money. So like this is a really great framework for looking at things. This guy says like in this book though that this is how people usually look at design. This isn't how he looks at it. He just looks at it as like, can a reasonable person get their job done in a reasonable amount of time, which is just below, but I ran out of room, so I didn't put his favorite thing about his preface. From the other book, The Design of Everyday Things, they talk about the 7 fundamental principles of design. This is like a really good vocabulary of things to consider. Some of these items were in my last talk on coding with confidence, where I talked about the system image, which is what you built, and then the conceptual model, which is what people understand about your system image and like how they use it to go about their day job. And like the feedback you get from that might change with the system image that you put out. Often a lot of people who build things like teapots don't get to talk to their end consumer. But when they do, they have that ability. Affordances and signifiers, these are things that like start to let the user know, like, I think where they are, and like a little bit of feedback on what's going on. So I mean, it's worth looking at. I haven't looked at the book in a while, but just knowing these terms exist is going to be super helpful if you're learning more about design. So that's with that, thank you. There's one more thing, which is just that top section. When things get a little too complex, you're probably stuck in a complexity tornado, especially with CSS. So the best thing to do is just like open up an HTML file and just start from scratch. There's huge value in like doing that. You're able to build something, get it working, and know that it's a working solution, so that you, when you re-enter your application, which might have 60 divs, you might be 60 divs deep and 7 CSS sheets that are cascading. It might not be working in your application, but you know that you've figured out how to get it working, you know, in a different format. So you know that you'll be able to bridge it somehow. The solution is there. That's the difference, is like knowing that there's a solution versus trying to get a solution in a very complex system. There's a huge difference there. Okay, thank you, everyone. All I got. Does anyone have questions? Does anyone want to go to BJ's? And if you find this chat tiresome, like I said, David is bringing in, he's open to other presenters, so feel free to take the mantle from my hands by force. I'm sure David will give you priority and your presentation priority.
We're always looking for speakers and all kinds of different things, so, this is, I really like this one because, it's one of those things, it's like, you know, typically, you know, we're thinking about like, you know, how do we implement this feature, or how do we, you know, communicate with this service or something like that. And this is a little bit more, this is a lot more like how, like an actual user, you know, thinks about interfaces with, you know, with an application that we're working on. And so, so yeah, I definitely appreciate it. And I was talking with a designer I work with at my current job, and you know, he was really curious about this. I told him we're going to record the presentation so he can see it too. So.
I have a question. In terms of, you've selected a design system, or you're working with a designer, you want to adopt something new, but you already have an existing application that already has design decisions made. Do you have any steps for working with designers to perform a transition from whatever you have existing to a new design system?
Okay, so the question was, you have an existing product and you are heading in a new direction, and how do you go about improving your entire system to be on this new product? And I think it's a discussion. I think it's when the designer on my team had a thought on columns, I said to myself, can I work within this system? Also, does this work within our existing system? How hard is this to implement? On the flip side, you want to communicate with your designer as much as possible what tools we use. One thing we ran into is that we told the designers on our team that we were using Material UI, but we were also using something called Material React Data Table. And they had looked at tables that were from Material UI, and they weren't looking at materials from Material React Data Table. And so when they came with these presentations, we were thinking, oh no, like so many changes requested, when that wasn't their intention all along. They thought they were operating within the same means. And so we were just a little bit more overly communicative of what we were doing. And also you try to flip your thinking. So instead of being constructive and saying that won't work, we try to think like, what, as a developer, how could I achieve like 4 of these objectives? For instance, we had them wanting to do all their actions on the right instead of on the left. How can I implement that? We wanted to change some of the search, and so I could like wire in and do something super custom. You also have to think about your application. I was going to have a slide on this, but you want to think about the things that are templates in your application, which means you have a single thing like a data table, and then that thing, maybe you have 50 data tables in your application because it's an information system. Well, you really just want to get really good at that base template. And then when you make a change to that, you want it to propagate through to the rest of the system. So if that gets out of whack, then you get into a lot of trouble. One thing you can do is just make your system a little bit leaner, organize, right? Try to simplify things, get rid of colors, try to kind of unify all of, like, if you have multiple variants on the same thing, can that just be one pop-up? Yeah, how can I use this as an opportunity to like start consolidating things?
What I'm hearing is reduce the amount of variance in different components if possible.
Just bring it to me and I'll tell you, like, I'll look at it, and it's a
If the question is, we've got a bunch of work that we've done, right? And now we've got this designer coming in and he wants to, tinker with a bunch of it, right? Which they tend to do.
Yeah.
I think some business theory and some game theory sort of applies, right? Because on the one hand, the designer doesn't want to be fixing things for fixing sake, right? But on the other hand, the designer may have justification for like wanting to sort of make changes. So I think like one of the easy ways to sort of do that, I think, is to like look at it through the lens of cost benefit, right? And I think like designers can sort of have their needs and wants, and developers can have their needs and wants, and then those two things can sort of be negotiated and reconciled, right? And then but I think what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of just sort of making surface level changes for the sake of changing cosmetics, where the underlying strengths and weaknesses of the application aren't going to be materially improved, right? Because then you're just sort of not spending time on the right things. But if the changes are sort of, number one, like visually different, that doesn't always mean that from an implementation perspective, they're hard to do, right? So I think that's one thing where I see like a lot of developers get caught off guard when they see sort of new designs reconciled against built work, is to say, wow, this sort of looks different, right? But like really, it's probably just a few things that are sort of swapped out from a modularity perspective. But I think like from the developer's perspective, letting the designer have a couple of wins and sort of like ingratiating their input onto the team and that kind of thing, I think will go a long way towards like building credible back and forth. Versus like if you're just going to be a sort of development team and every time the designer comes in, you guys are going to sort of sit across the table from
Yeah.
with your arms crossed, then that's going to be a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, so Andy just said like there's often a cost benefit. Sometimes a great decision, great idea does not necessarily have to be costly. It can be potentially easy to implement. And that goes along with what I was kind of mentioning with our React data table situation. When she was presenting all of these details, I was like, okay, well, there's really 4 things you want to do here. And I was looking up the APIs and I'm like, well, that's easy to do. That's also easy to do. And that's easy to do. So yeah, we could do all these things. And so then we like wrote it up into like a document for like when we're gonna work on that task. So that like you want to be efficient and like, yeah, get wins to these designers that, so that they know you're their ally and not constantly fighting them. What do you got?
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off his point, when you start designing your different systems, eventually, there's gonna be a natural evolution. So do you think that through, like, I guess through your experience as far as with UIs, does it tend to be kind of natural progression that whatever you're designing tends to be scalable? Or do you find that you have to be intentional with making the application scalable? So because again, customers' desires change, society changes, values changes.
Yeah, I would say that's a part of this talk is that you have to be intentional that as the application grows, we need to organize this, we need to build it in a scalable way, and that's why I'm kind of leaning into these templates, like where are the areas where we're duplicating functionality, like where do we actually need to invent and where can we just use something that already exists, and in that differentiation that you need, that should be driven by like your customers' needs. So you don't have to innovate on everything, you just have to innovate on the right thing. And
So just to kind of build on the discussion we got having, I think some of this is gonna be stacked or sort of like delivery dependent, right? Like commonly a lot of UI and UX designers are working on stuff that's mobile, right? And so you have iOS and you got Android. And going back to your question about, okay, well, how much boutique customization do you have for those types of things? And the reality is you want to minify that as much as possible, but some of the behaviors on the two, particularly around things like notifications or modal patterns or like these other kind of things, you have ones that are sort of OS level from Android, and you have others that are OS level from iOS, right? And so you sort of by definition have to have some branching of customization there. Now you can sort of mitigate some of that by using sort of like a build once from anywhere solution like Flutter, which I've sort of also seen done, but that's gonna sort of bear other opportunity costs, considerations and that kind of thing, right? And then you can get into other things like, what your throughput is and what your tech debt is and all, like, and where does it sort of make sense to sort of justify one switch to another. But I think like to boil all the rest of it away, and I think to go back to one of the other conversations about like, is this change worth it and can we justify it? I think the quickest way to do that in sort of all the projects that I've been involved with is list out in sort of the task that you're trying to map out that like, okay, we have a user or customer and they need to sort of complete this task, and to do so, they need to sort of go from point A to point B. The most compelling and efficient way to sort of communicate that is a case study, both to sort of your coworkers and to sort of your managerial class and to the customers themselves, is to observe them if you can, and if not, just sort of go through it and say, look, to sort of complete this task, the existing solution, they have to do steps 1 to 10, right? And in this new one, they have to sort of do 1 through 6, right? We can sort of almost by definition say that the second one is going to be better, right? Because we can sort of say like, okay, it's less things we have to sort of build and maintain. The customer has less steps that they have to do. So, their abandonment rate or, their task completion percentage is all going to be higher. And I think like putting sort of inexpensive tactical strategy, like to sort of pair up with some of these inherent this inherent friction that you have, and what's the right thing to build? What's the right way to build it? Like, is it working? Are the stakeholders going to approve it? Is this like, sort of list it out and say, hey, you know, like, we feel like this on paper is materially better, and we can sort of all agree to that, or we can sort of verify sort of our hypothesis with users, but I think it all sort of, is sort of different flavors of the conversation, like, does the delta change justify sort of rethinking what we're doing, and, like, if it's material in a good way, I think developer, stakeholder, customer, designer, everybody can get on board.
Yeah, to summarize what Andy just said there, I think he was conveying, one of the things to add to the discussion is, your cost benefit ratio, and adding that, new rework, is it worth the squeeze? And also the simplicity of the solution when you think about, a user and where they need to go in the application. Is this less steps? Almost like Occam's razor, like the simple solution can be a good solution. I would say like refactoring UI kind of adds on to that. It says, when you're starting out in an application, keep your options limited. Those constraints can be helpful, and it can keep things simple, and you can add complexity later. Like be mindful when you're adding complexity, like try not to add complexity, and maybe going back to being simpler is a good solution. Yeah, like simple can sometimes be good.
I mean, I would think about it, how do you like to do things, right? Like, it's always ease of use, so you don't want to over engineer, you just want to make it as, I mean, I don't want to go on a website and have to click 18 things to get to where I'm going, so.
Unless the website is called click18things.com and you get a prize at the end.
Yeah, you
Hotjar,
almost get disappointed if it's 17 clicks.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be very angry. I'd be like, I got gypped.
I was gonna recommend Hotjar for helping to identify those things where you can kind of reduce the number of steps that the user has. So we've been using a Hotjar at my current company to figure out where users are struggling.
What
Yeah.
what is it?
Hotjar.
Yeah, so Hotjar was mentioned. Hotjar is kind of like a recording tool that you put into your UI that lets you know when people are rage clicking or when they're, interacting with your application, what's going on.
Yeah.
You can also use one called Full Story. I've used both, and Full Story will actually give you like a screen recording,
Yes.
and you can tell them like what traffic you want to see. Like we only want to see people who are having a bad time, or we want to see people who are like checking out quickly. And so like you can go based off like how long they've been on the application and like how many links that they've gone through. Yeah, I mean, there are other.
Cause it
Yeah.
records their mouse movement. It records their mouse movements, so you can actually see them moving their mouse,
Yeah.
clicking around the UI. It's the craziest thing, but it's not video. It like uses a script to track that. And it's like replaying. You'll see them scroll to the bottom, look for the link, scroll up, scroll back down, and then they click and you realize what they were trying to do. They
Yeah.
get frustrated, so it's very useful.
We used to have meetings where we would watch the full stories together, and we would like try to guess what they were going to do.
Have
And
line
then,
odds for over-unders.
yeah, have betting odds. Let's
Good
go.
drinking games out of that.
Okay. Did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question about the pictures. We haven't talked about pictures at all. Do you guys design the system after you, before you do the picture or after you do the pictures?
Well,
Because
Andy might be a better expert to talk to on this. I typically work in information systems, so very data heavy. But we might have a logo that we're kind of taking inspiration from. Do you have any take on?
What's the question? What's the design related question?
It's
when I design a web page, sometimes I do it around pictures. So I design a picture first, and then after I'm like, yeah, let's fill it in. Or sometimes,
Like Figma or Photoshop or something.
yeah, stuff like that. Or sometimes I'm thinking maybe the reverse, but I'm not sure which way is the better approach.
A page, like a web page?
No, we're talking about pictures, like little picture. Let's say you're doing a web page about coffee. Do you have picture of coffee mugs right out before you even start with the web page? Or do you do it the reverse? You're like, yeah, I want to design first, and then I'm going to make it so that it fit in. Little
So,
coffee birds.
it's
Oh,
a-
accents?
Yeah.
As far as I understand your question, there's sort of a few things that, I think would just be rules of the road, right? One is, at least for most UI and UX designers who are credible, like visual design isn't gonna drive the whole thing. They might sort of be more visually forward, than something else, but I think like your example about the nested divs is like, essentially it's a product and sort of the products and services have to be put up in a coherent way so that people can like, know what they're trying to accomplish and sort of click through. But I think where we're getting into sort of very dangerous territory is like, well, what are the subjective design choices, right? And who is sort of the arbiter of the final solution, right? Like the visual designer or UI UX designer, or whoever is sort of doing the implementation, right? Because I think, at least in some of the examples that they talk about in how to design cool things, like let's say they have a 16:9 image and you want to use rule thirds to sort of have your coffee maker and your espresso machine and the beans like all sort of grouped in a nice compelling composition, but then you also want to have a small call to action that says, hey, we're introducing Colombian free trade, take this call to action to save, whatever on checkout, right? And so like the implementation of that, I think is gonna be a very case by case dialogue between like, okay, well, what are sort of the, and this kind of gets complicated quickly because depending on your organization, like your design standards can change. You may or may not have all this different disciplines like visual designers, or you just sort of have a couple guys who like find stuff on Unsplash and just sort of plug it in, and you might be limited to what you can scour like that's royalty free or whatever. But I think like in general, being able to sort of allow for some incremental complexity, or I hate to say sort of freewheeling or customization in some of those small moments, I personally don't think is the worst thing in the world, because it really can. Some of the like not being so constricted to just sort of flow, like block flow diagramming and that kind of thing, like having a little bit of incremental complexity to do something that resolves in a nice way visually. Like sometimes that can really be worth the incremental effort. The problem is that it's gonna be somewhat subjective. Like if you ask the developer, he's gonna say nobody gives a crap, right? If you ask the designer, he's gonna say that people are gonna abandon your business and go shop at Starbucks or whatever.
And then just to add to that, like there are also different types of pages. You might be on a splashing page, a landing page, you might be on a home page, all have different objectives that they're trying to accomplish. Also like the design of everyday things has a section in here where it says like the designer is trying to make like a good experience and a useful experience for the user, and the marketer is trying to make money and like pitch things, and like while the designer might be doing some of those things as well, like even the marketer might have different opinions on like how things should look. So that's a good question. I think we're getting close to time though.
Yeah.
So, maybe you can talk after you can ask a question after the talk, and I'll stop the recording.
I got it.
Okay.